It's difficult to separate the cottage or Daniel from the tall man with the black hat. You couldn't think of one without thinking of all three. There must be something in that number. 3. 3 nights in a row I heard the cry of the banshee before the living became the dead. 3 knocks on the window before he was called to the grave. There'd always be strange things happening in that cottage. Lights flickering when we got in the electric, the bulb swinging on the wire like a hanged man, and footsteps ringing out in the night when there weren't a body to make them. I've heard that in some places the barriers between the two worlds, the living and the dead, are slim and liable for visitations. If that's the case, and you can bet that the cottage is such a place. Mammy said that the tall man with the black hat didn't start appearing until Daniel was born. Little Danny was asleep in the crib when the man appeared at the end of the bed. He never talked to the like. He just stood there and then he was gone before Mammy could give out a screech. After that she'd see the tall man with the black hat more often than she cared to remember. He liked walking the perimeters of the cottage and lurking at the gate at the front of the house. But his favourite place to haunt was always the stream at the back of the garden. That's where he was spotted the most. During all the sightings, Mammy never saw his face, mind. It was always covered with the shadow from the hat. At least she never saw his face until many a year later. Daddy never could see him though, nor could I for that matter. Even though I never saw him, by God, I never doubted his existence, not for a moment. I'd wake up to long shadows on the wall that would disappear as soon as the sleep cleared from my eyes. Then when the sleep would have cleared, I'd hear my little brother having conversations with a phantom. I'd say to him, "Daniel, who are you talking to?" And it would always be the same reply. The tall man with the black hat. Ever since he was a tot, Daniel's greatest pal was the tall man with the black hat, and he was forever keeping him company at the end of the garden. Then when Danny was 13, he went and got work in Dublin as an apprentice, and he forgot all about his childhood friend. Now I know some people like to say that it's the children that see spirits, but there couldn't be much truth in that. Sure, Mammy could see him, and Daniel could too, as was revealed during that Christmas. It was the festive season of 1974, and I'd just come back from England with my own children. Daniel had come back from Dublin to celebrate Christmas with Mammy and Daddy. I hadn't seen Danny in many a year at that point, and I never gave much thought to phantoms. Sure, I was far too busy in the rearing of my own young. Anyways, to make a long story short, the fire was blazing and I was sitting before peeling potatoes into the pot. Mammy was out the back. I could hear her shout out our Saviour's name. Then she rushed into the cottage with a face as pale as the snow what lined our windowsills. She roared my brother's name so loud that I cut my finger on the knife with the shock her shriek gave me. My brother ran out of the back room. "What is it, Mammy?" he said. "What's the matter? Is it Daddy?"
"Would you just come out of the garden? I want to show you something,"
she said. Daniel went outside and I followed them out. Mammy turned to Daniel as soon as she turned the corner of the cottage.
"Can you see anything, Danny?"
she said. Daniel strained his eyes. "There's a tall man at the end of the garden. He's wearing a hat, so he is. Do you know him, Mammy?"
"Can you see his face?"
Mammy asked. "His back's turned. Ah, Mammy, do you know him? Was he giving you any trouble?"
"No, Sonny, he's no trouble at all. Let's all get in at the cold,"
Mammy said to him. I heard the wailing outside the window for the first time that night. When I said it to Mammy next morning, she only blessed herself and set to fixing the breakfast. Over the day, the darkness of the cottage only deepened. Mammy piled the turf onto the fire and lit all the oil lamps in the cottage, but all they did were cast shadows. That night I heard the howling again. When I said it to Mammy the next morning, I'm full certain I saw a tear drop down her cheek. That last day were Christmas Eve, but there were little cheer in the house. Even my little ones sensed the sombre air and sulked in the corner with matching rag dolls clutched in their tiny hands. The night before it happened, I was just falling into sleep when I heard 3 taps at the window. Sure, I thought it was just some dream and I ignored it, glad to put another day behind me and get closer to going back to England and away from that cottage. But I couldn't ignore the shriek that came next. That awful howling, I'll never forget it. I recount this now after all these years, and I swear after the howling I heard wheels and the clatter of horses' hoofs. So you might think me a foolish, superstitious woman, but I swear that howling was the banshee, and them wheels and the hoofs were belonging to the horsemen of death. Oh, but I was young and in need of pretending to keep my sanity, so I filled my head with lies and drifted into sleep, while outside snow fell down on top of the dead. Next morning, Mammy was out fetching some coal when she found Daniel dead at the back of the garden. Till this day, no one was full certain as to what he was doing back there at that ungodly hour. All that can be known is that his heart had given him some trouble and he fell down unconscious into the stream at the back of the garden. I've heard tell that drowning is peaceful. I'd hoped for Danny it were anyways. Only a young man he was, not even a quarter of a century. He was a good boy. He was a good boy. Never a drinker was Danny, and he barely touched tobacco. But his heart punished him all the same. We waked him in the parlour on the day of the wren, dressed him in his black suit with the matching black hat,